Okay, so I'm going to really start a conversation about how to monetize or how to make money with your app. And I haven't spent a lot of time on cost because there's such a wide variability about cost. So I am prepared to talk about that with questions. But this presentation is going to focus on ways to generate revenue. So hopefully that makes sense. So the first thing to know is that more than 90% of all apps on the main app stores, which are the iOS Apple App Store and the Google Play Android App Store, the vast majority of the apps are actually free to download and use. And I'm going to go into the various ways that you can monetize. And I'm sure there'll be ways that you all will think about that I haven't thought about. So don't hesitate to bring those up as well. So three popular methods. The first one is in-app purchases. I'm sure you're familiar with this when you're downloading an app and it tries to sell you on some sort of upgrade or additional feature, and it tries to get you to to click on it while you're in the app. That's an in-app purchase. Also, the two other common ones are subscription services and advertising, which I think you all are familiar with as well. Okay, so in-app purchases are really divided into two, and the terminology used in the industry is consumables versus non-consumables. So an example, a consumable in-app purchase is generally temporary and limited in what it would do. Non-consumables generally only have to be purchased one time or very infrequently. So I'm going to use an example of a North Carolina app that's been quite successful, and that's Fortnite. So a consumable in Fortnite is something they call V-Bucks, which are used to purchase costumes and skins along with other limited time purchases in the Fortnite shop. So I've never played Fortnite, so maybe some of you all are familiar with this. But you're buying something that's really temporary and just for that session in most cases. Fortnite also has something called Battle Pass, which I'm going to characterize as a non-consumable because it provides extra benefits for the player, and it goes beyond that particular session. Although in the case of Battle Pass, it does have to be renewed depending on what term you select when you buy it. You can drop the Battle Pass and go back to the free game, or you can renew. But this, I think, makes the point between something that's temporary and limited for the moment at hand and something that maybe continues past that particular session. Okay, the next one is subscription services. And this is where you can offer different experiences to paying users, for example, compared to those who might be using your app for free. You can offer multiple subscription levels. For example, would be one is free, two would be some sort of a plus category, which might allow a rewind function, for example, in the case of a game, or to undo choices made as one example. And then a third could be a gold or a premium level, which gives everything that the other tiers have, plus something unique and special like no advertising as an example. I think you all have run across this where they have different benefits for different subscriptions. I think also with a digital platform, you can offer different terms also. So you don't it doesn't have to be, for example, a subscription for 1 year. It could be for some other period of time for each level. For example, your top of the line gold level or premium, maybe that's good for 1 year, and the other ones are 6 months or some shorter period of time. Okay, so advertising is probably the most common way for apps to make money. There are three basic types: cost per thousand, which is often referred to as CPM; CPC, which is cost per click, and CPA, which is cost per action. One of the things that you want to be careful of with ads is you want to be sure the ad fits in with your brand. You don't want, obviously, you don't want ads from direct competitors, but you also don't want ads that are not in keeping with your brand message or your brand story. There may be certain category of ads that you don't want to show on your platform. So you just have to be aware. And we'll talk a little bit about where ads come from, but ad networks, there are a lot of different ad networks out there, and some of them you don't get as much control over what shows on your app as with others. So that's just something to be aware of. Another thing is to understand about apps. One of the reasons that apps have become so popular really is because more and more people are using their phones to use the internet. It might be for shopping, it might be for other things, but in general, apps are much faster loading than a website, for example. So you want to be careful with your ads. Ads are often being served to your app from another location. So you have to be careful and make sure that they don't load slowly or that they have some sort of process that makes the user experience on your app less than ideal. This is particularly true when you're talking about video. Video can use a lot of bandwidth, can take a lot of time to load. Just be very cognizant if you are using video ads or any other kind of graphic. Make sure you test it not only on a high-speed quality network, but also on slower things like a cell phone network or other places that people will access your app. Or make sure you have an idea what it's all going to look like on the various ways that people would get access to your app. Surveys, and there's a bunch of them out there, say that about 80% of mobile users will accept ads that are relevant. And that's actually higher percentage-wise than you'll see on the web. Some people, really make an effort to block all ads on their browsers, on their computer, and there are various programs you can do that. And you can get them for your phone also. And there's actually some talk right now. Apple apparently is changing the way iPhones are going to get permission from the user for your data to be shared with an advertiser. And a lot of people like Facebook has actually taken out full-page newspaper ads saying that Apple is going to hurt the industry by providing this control to the consumers. But I think it's coming. People weren't aware that so much of their data was being shared without their knowledge. So there's been a real backlash against capturing data without people really understanding that. So I think you're gonna be dealing with that as you think about advertising on your app. There's three basic types of ads: banner ads, interstitial, and native ads. So banner ads, I'm sure you all are familiar with. These are common. They're generally a little bit animated. They might have some action in them, but they're fairly low acuity is the word I would use to describe them. Interstitial ads are a little bit different in that they take over the whole screen of your app. You may have seen this happen, particularly I noticed for gaming. A lot of their ads will flash on your phone, take over your whole screen, and show some activity on whatever it is that they're advertising. Native ads are relatively new and really growing in popularity. And the best way to understand native ads, not only do they match the look and feel of your app, but they're also a little more integrated with content. An example I would give you, if you've ever been on Pinterest or even Instagram, sometimes you'll be looking at a page and you'll see a lot of different content, and one of the pieces of content will actually be an ad. and it'll often have the word ad or advertising under it, but it looks exactly like the rest of the content on that page. Pinterest is a perfect example. If you're familiar with Pinterest, they have, all kinds of crafts and different ideas. And so you might be looking at a screen that would have 6 or 8 different pieces of content, and one of those 6 or 8 could be an ad, and it'll be labeled as such. So they tend to do better in certain categories than the banner and the interstitials that I've mentioned. And also with all these ads, you have text-only ads, you have some kind of graphical ad, which could be a still photograph or some kind of art type work or drawing or artist rendering of something, and then you have video. And video is coming on really strong. I think those of you who are familiar with TikTok, TikTok has gone, they now have 850 million users a day. And that's primarily credited to their short video format, among other things. But it is a big user of video compared to platforms in the past. Okay, so I'm going to just go through a few items here, and please don't hesitate to ask me a question because it may be things that you're not familiar with. One of the things is in this class, I know there's a variety of use cases for the apps that you're working on, and I realize not all are going to be consumer apps, direct-to-consumer apps. So I wanted to cover some additional items just to make you aware of. And the first one, you may have heard this term and wondered what it was, but PWAs is a really coming on strong format, if you will, for apps, and it stands for Progressive Web Apps. This is a technology that's been promoted by Google primarily, and what it does is it basically provides a app experience, but it uses the web rather than a dedicated app. And the characteristics of the PWA are that it's very fast like an app. When you click on the screen, it immediately responds, unlike a website per se. It's actually like a little miniature website. And the reason these are becoming really, really popular are a number of reasons. One of them is that both Apple and Google, there's been a lot of controversy lately about some of their policies. For example, Apple, when the pandemic kind of got rolling full speed, Airbnb, as one company, decided to start offering digital experiences on their platform. So instead of renting an Airbnb house or taking a cooking class on Airbnb, they turned to digital experiences and really promoted it because of the pandemic. And as a consequence, the experiences that were presented by Airbnb became wildly successful in May and June of this year. I believe in June, it may have even hit like $500 million worth of revenue for Airbnb from these digital experiences. And they could be things like cooking class, how to, artwork, how to use a camera, all that sort of thing. And so they got a letter from Apple after this experience. And Apple told them that if they read the fine print in the Apple App Store, they would realize that they owe Apple 30% of the revenue generated by these experiences. So it turns out that there is fine print, that Apple can demand a very high percentage of the revenue generated. Now, 90% plus of the apps on the App Store do not generate anywhere near $1 million a year. They're a fraction, but 5% of them actually generate in the billions. Airbnb, just one example. So if you want to avoid that risk, you can develop a PWA instead of an iOS app and drive people to that and avoid uh, the Apple App Store in this case completely. The other thing about PWAs to understand is think of it as kind of a front end or the piece that a consumer sees on their phone or computer, and behind it could be all sorts of different apps and technologies that are feeding the data to the PWA. You could, for example, have a regular website, but with a PWA front end, so it looks and acts like an app, but it's really the same as a website. The other thing I wanted to point out, and I'm sure there are many more than just these three examples, but there are a lot of alternative app stores out there, and depending on your app, I think I would encourage you to find out, is there an app store in your category? So for example, Zoom has an app store, and most of those apps on the Zoom app store are in fact related to video conferencing. So, it's not going to have the breadth of apps like the Apple App Store, but it does have a lot of apps that are useful for people who use Zoom. And this is also true of Salesforce.com and Shopify. Shopify, you may be familiar with. They're an e-commerce software provider. So their app store is full of all kinds of apps that help you with your e-commerce store. It could be things like email marketing apps. It could be things that help your pictures look better on your website. Any number of functions that are added to Shopify by third parties. They generally take the form of an app on the Shopify App Store. And I don't know, but I would bet that there are app stores for in the healthcare field, in other fields that I'm not familiar with. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there are app stores available where your app, for example, could be placed in order to get people using it. And this ties into this next bullet, which is partnerships and joint ventures with established apps. So for example, there is a company in South Florida called Papa, and Papa is a company that provides college students to work with elderly people, and they act as helpers. They're paid, I believe it's $20 an hour, and they do all kinds of things for seniors. It could be running to the grocery store. It could be, there's one example where the elderly person is an author, and he's hired a bunch of these folks to act as proofreaders for his various publications. So any kind of thing that the senior might want to have help with, Papa provides this person and vets them and makes sure it's safe and all that kind of thing. Well, recently they announced that they're going into the telehealth space because they found that when these people are sitting with the seniors, they could actually help them, for example, with a doctor's appointment through telehealth. They could help the senior deal with the technology, which is an issue for many seniors, can answer questions for the medical doctor. So that's an example of a partnership or a joint venture, which is beyond the scope of the business, but by coming together with someone else, in this case, a telehealth company, they're able to increase the value of their enterprise, but they're not having to invest and create all of the functions and features. Another example of this is Spotify. Spotify provides access to their system through something called an API, which is an advanced program interface. And with that program, you can actually build functionality on top of Spotify that you can monetize. So, for example, I ran across one. The person who is building this is making it really easy to create Christmas and holiday music on Spotify. So it's a little app, and you click a couple times, and you have every Christmas song that you might want instead of having to search through Spotify to create it. The other thing I've got on here is something called omni-channel efforts, and what that refers to is when you think about an app, people tend to think of it as its own thing, right? It's an app. It does the following. It communicates and sells in certain ways. But many people are starting to realize that that is just part of an effort, that there are other channels to reach, even if you have an app. And that could include a website, that include a partnership. It could even involve retail stores, working with retail stores, for example. So the idea is to identify which channel should you offer to reach your target market, and how many of them make sense. I mentioned in the beginning here are these things called PWAs. PWAs are often used so that you don't have to maintain lots of different customer-facing apps. You can just have one, and then you can use that in a lot of different channels. And that's another advantage of a PWA as a front end. And then the last bullet I have on here is really an important one, and that is customer service. Regardless of what your business is or what service you're providing, there is going to be a need to deal with people who, everything from, they're having problems downloading your app all the way to they want to return a product and everything in between. And this is actually a pretty significant cost, and it's something you have to pay attention to. You also have to, depending on your audience, your target customer, which way do they prefer to deal with a vendor? Is it phone? Is it text? Is it by the web? So this is something that you need to think about. One thing that I have found out in my research recently is that text-based customer service is really booming. People really like it. It's convenient. They don't have to dial a phone, yet they're still interacting with an individual. The texts are usually saved, the chats, if you will. So text-based customer service may be a good thing to start with, and may handle a lot of your needs, for quite a while as you build out your business. So what I'd like to talk about now is not on a slide, but it is something that I think all of you should be thinking about. I sat in the presentation the day before yesterday and heard questions asked like, how are you going to get customers? And some of the responses were, there were a variety of responses. But what I wanted to just say is I think it's important to think about emotion and commitment to what it is that you're doing. When you develop a mentality that you'll do what it takes to achieve your goals, then you'll find that you'll be much more open to things that maybe you hadn't thought about. Like, you may well think a particular approach to gaining customers is going to work, and maybe it will and maybe it won't. But as you really think about it and you really get passionate about what you're doing and your desire to solve the problem of the customers that you've identified from your calls and your other work, you really have to think about the energy and the emotion and the commitment that you're making that goes well beyond, kind of the nuts and bolts of building an app or a website. It's really a mentality and an attitude. And if I had to characterize what differentiates a successful entrepreneur from others, it's generally this will or this desire to deliver the product and the service, no matter what happens. And believe me, everything will happen. It's just the nature of this kind of thing. So I just I think that we tend to use our intellectual side to analyze opportunities, to think about what we're trying to do and how to do it. But the other side of that coin is the emotional side and the commitment side. And ask yourself, how committed are you to what you're doing? I understand you have to kind of figure that out. but I think it's a really important process that you have to do and think about whether it's reaching out to people like me or other entrepreneurs that you know and asking them about, you know, how did they light the fire? How did they get so crazy? You often hear the term crazy entrepreneur, and it's usually about things like that, emotional. How far will you go, um, you know, to really do what you're doing? So I just encourage you to think about that. And I will just tell a really quick story just to kind of amplify this. So there was a village in India, and they had this rogue elephant that would come into the village and wreck the village all the time. It really became a problem. So they finally figured out, or they thought they had a solution. They found a person who could ride elephants. And he was a very good rider of elephants. So they said, aha, we'll put the rider on the elephant, and that person will be able to control this elephant. So they interviewed, and they finally found this person who was willing to climb up on the elephant, and he climbed up on the elephant. And the next day, the elephant came to the town and totally wrecked the town again. So everyone was like, what happened? I thought we had this rider that was supposed to control it. And so they interviewed the rider, and the rider said, listen, you think that my job as a rider is to control this elephant. Well, my job as a rider is to explain why the elephant did what it did. In other words, the elephant is a real force and is going to do what it's going to do. And the intellectual explanation of it, you may find helpful, but it's not what you think it is. So that's my my final pitch, and any questions or thoughts, I'm happy to respond to.
Great. Thank you so much, Dennis. Definitely an eye opener in terms of costs and revenue. I think we have several questions in the chat, and the first one I'd like to just get off is related to PWAs, or progressive web apps, as you mentioned. Can you just describe a little bit more what a PWA is and how it relates to your traditional mobile app and website?
Yeah. So it's basically, think of it as it's basically an app that's built on the web instead of on a platform like the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. So it looks and acts like an app. So give you an example, Microsoft Office, all of their apps now, Office 365, Word, Excel, those are all progressive web apps. They are not websites. They are not downloadable code. They run in your browser. So those are examples. Also, Gmail is another example of a PWA. In fact, all of Google's services are run in the cloud, and the part that faces you as the customer might look like an app or like a website, but it's actually a PWA. So those are all examples of PWAs that are being used, and there are quite a few more. The big reason for it, I think I stated, but the fact is that about 70% of visits to e-commerce apps are actually from telephones and not from computers. So the growth in apps is really a desire to make the experience of someone on a mobile device, to be fast, because they found, like, for example, if they click on something on an iPhone and that page doesn't come up within a second or so, they will abandon the app and they'll move on to somewhere else. So the apps themselves are very quick. When you click on something on an app, it comes up immediately. And in the case of PWAs, it does the exact same thing. It's optimized so it acts and responds like a dedicated app. So it's mostly about speed and responsiveness. And I think if you Google it, you'll find a ton of stuff. It's kind of the next big thing. Just about everybody, including Facebook, they're all going to PWAs because of so many people accessing these resources on a mobile device. Regular old websites just don't cut it. There's too many things going on the website that make it slow. So the PWA is really the web's answer to apps that are dedicated to particular ecosystems, like the Apple Store or Google Play Store.
Right. And so just, I guess you can also think of it as if you ever see a web version or an app version of a website, some companies or some websites have really good app versions of their websites, and other companies have really bad versions of their websites. And if I can speak from experience, if your website or your app doesn't load within the first 5 or 10 seconds, I'm going to go somewhere else. So definitely important to keep track of your loading time. So our next question is, do you have a general rule of thumb for CD/CI after initial deployment? And did you need clarification for what CD or CI means?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with those terms. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I also would like clarification. Can you just, I think the question's from Kwan Hung. Can you elaborate more so on what you mean by CD/CI? Continuous development and continuous integration.
Okay. Well, from my experience of the businesses that I have run, everything's continuous, right? So if you launch a website and you're selling stuff, for example, you're constantly trying to get it to work better, to deal with issues. So I haven't heard those particular terms, but my experience, at least with e-commerce, is that is just basic block and tackling, constant development, constant integration, constant everything all the time, 24/7 has been my experience.
All right. So our next question is actually going back to the topic of PWA, just so we can really hammer in that particular topic. Joanne wants to know, what is the cost difference, if any, between developing a PWA and a more traditional app?
A PWA in general should be a lot cheaper because it doesn't have to follow all of the protocol rules that, for example, Apple requires. So in general sense, it should be quite a bit less expensive. Also keep in mind, though, that discovery of your app is the reason the App Store has been so popular in the Google App Store is because it aids in discovery. People go on there and look around. They go to the Apple App Store and search for apps. Your PWA doesn't have that benefit. So it may be cheaper in that sense, but you also have to realize you're not going to get kind of the organic search that you would get from a dedicated app. So that's something to consider also.
Okay. So generally speaking, are PWAs built to work on your phone and your computer, or one over the other?
Actually, they are designed primarily to work on your phone. That's the purpose of them. However, it work equally as well on your website on your browser, if your browser is relatively modern, right? Some people never upgrade their browser, so they're going to have a problem probably in most cases. But people using up-to-date browsers will have the same kind of fast experience with your PWA on their computer as they would on a mobile device.
Okay. And when you're speaking with an app developer, do you generally make sure they're developing a PWA or an app, traditional app, or how does that conversation play out?
You negotiate a contract with them that specifies what work they're going to do. That's critical. So a developer, someone that you're paying money, you have to have a statement of work and a game plan that lays out what it is that you want. I think that when you're starting off and you're basically really what you're doing is it's a proof of concept. You've got your MVP or minimum viable product, and you want to see if it works, the way you think it's going to. So you want to have the lowest cost option that you can that still allows you to test your hypothesis or test your concept. But the terms of what is being built for you should be outlined in a statement of work and a contract.
Right. So can you give us some tips on how we can establish partnerships with other apps, software, or platforms, especially if we're starting off with our business or our idea?
Well, I think you have to, in our case, looking around our community, places like Vidant or, other medical groups, I'm using that as an example. I would just call up and find out who handles partnerships or arrangements and pitch them on working with you because you can help them reach their objective. So even if you're a bigger organization, particularly in our area, um, they're always looking for ways to increase their reach. And if they can find a way that relatively painless, it's of the same quality that they are, same kind of attitude or whatever, then they're likely. And I would approach them on the idea of doing a pilot project as opposed to some long-term deal. Go approach them and say, I'd like to do a promotion with you for 30 days on X and Y. And we think we can reach, for example, we think we can reach the East Carolina students with our app, and we'd like to partner with you because we think the students would also benefit from your services. So you would be leveraging your population and your belief as to what you're doing, and seeing if it matches with what they're trying to do. And by offering it as a pilot project, it has a start and a stop, and people are more ready to say yes to a pilot than they are some kind of long-term deal. You can always convert a pilot project into a long-term deal, but to go out as a startup and get some kind of long-term deal is pretty tough.
Right. So in regards to that conversation, is there a minimum set of requirements before they'd actually want to speak with you? For example, do we need a business plan, an executive summary, a working app, so forth and so forth?
Um, I would think you would want to at least have a prototype or some sort of wireframe that it maps out what you're doing, so that they can respond to the offer. Right? If they don't, they got to see what it is you're talking about. What kind of quality it is. What kind of what you're all about. How you're going about doing this. So I would hesitate to make any blanket, you got to have this or that. You basically have to sell them on your vision and what you're trying to do. And generally speaking, some sort of prototype or even a PowerPoint or some sort of wireframe, something that lays out what you're doing, so that they can respond to the opportunity with some degree of comfort as to what you're talking about.
All right. So it looks like we're just about out of time. And so our last question for you, Dennis, is related to ads. So how do you verify the content from ad networks? It's impossible to tell what the clients will see. Sometimes ads go against the purpose of the application, especially in the healthcare field.
Yeah, it's a problem, and the best way I can think of is to just negotiate the terms of your arrangement with the ad network. And in some cases, you may have an ad agency representing you, or maybe ECU even offers some of this help. I don't know, in somewhere in the university, but it's really it's just something you have to try to figure out. You want to use legal processes as much as you can, agreements, understandings, and also I think making sure you're dealing with, you understand who is in the ad network. If there are a bunch of undesirable companies or apps that are in that ad network, even if it looks attractive to you, I would stay away, because there's a chance those ads could appear on your app. So it's really a bear. I don't have an easy answer, but it's like any other contract. You just have to negotiate, and you have to have a game plan for dealing with violations or things that aren't what you signed up for.